You people don't belong in neighborhoods like this." Richard Pemberton's words cut through the afternoon air as he stepped out of his pristine white BMW, pointing an accusatory finger at the young black woman walking calmly down Willowbrook Heights' tree-lined sidewalk. "I'm calling the police right now." The woman, barely 18, didn't flinch. She simply adjusted the manila folder under her arm and continued walking with an unusual composure that seemed to unnerve him further. Within minutes, sirens wailed. Handcuffs clicked. A courtroom door swung open to reveal a packed gallery, their collective gasp echoing off mahogany walls as a small leather case flipped open to reveal something no one saw coming. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone's entire life gets judged by a single moment? When assumptions become accusations, and accusations become handcuffs? What you're about to hear isn't just another story about injustice. It's about what happens when the system encounters someone it never expected to meet. Aaliyah Chen Williams had always been different. At 18, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made adults take notice. Her mixed heritage, Chinese mother, black father, had taught her to navigate spaces where she often felt like she didn't quite fit. But today, walking through the upscale Willowbrook Heights neighborhood in suburban Virginia, she had a specific purpose. The manila folder tucked under her arm contained documents that would surprise most people. Not college applications or job resumes, but something far more significant. Something that explained why she moved through the world with the measured steps of someone much older, much more experienced. Richard Pemberton, 52 and president of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association for the past 6 years, had built his reputation on what he called maintaining standards. His neighbors knew him as the man who measured grass heights with a ruler and documented every paint chip on every mailbox. What they didn't know was the pattern in his complaints. In the past 18 months, Pemberton had filed 43 formal grievances with local authorities. 37 of those involved Black or Hispanic residents. The complaints ranged from suspicious gatherings in backyards to non-conforming landscaping choices. C. Each report was meticulously documented, photographed, and submitted through proper channels. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Aaliyah was visiting the neighborhood for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Her recent address change, a consequence of her parents' divorce, had brought her to temporary housing with her elderly great-aunt, Mrs. Chen, who lived 2 blocks away. But Aaliyah's walks through Willowbrook Heights weren't casual strolls. She was conducting an assessment. The folder contained architectural drawings, property surveys, and security evaluations that most 18-year-olds wouldn't understand, let alone possess. Her training had taught her to notice details others missed. Sightlines, access points, vulnerability patterns. As she walked, she made mental notes with the systematic approach of a professional. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, 73 and a resident of Willowbrook Heights for over 20 years, watched from her front porch as the young woman passed. Something about Aaliyah's bearing reminded her of people from her past, people who moved through the world with purpose disguised as casualness. Mrs. Rodriguez had spent 30 years working in government service before retirement, and she recognized the look. Pemberton's white BMW pulled into his driveway just as Aaliyah reached the corner of Maple and 3rd Street. He'd been monitoring the neighborhood through his home security system, noting what he called irregularities in foot traffic patterns. The sight of the same young black woman walking his streets for the 3rd time triggered what he considered appropriate action. Aaliyah noticed his car, noted his aggressive exit, and continued walking. Her training had prepared her for confrontations, though not exactly this type. When Pemberton approached, his finger already extended in accusation, she maintained the calm demeanor that had been drilled into her through months of specialized preparation. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady. "Is there something I can help you with?" The question caught Pemberton off guard. Most people he confronted became defensive, argumentative. This young woman seemed genuinely curious about his concerns, which somehow made him angrier. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped down from her porch, moving closer to the unfolding scene. Something told her this situation was about to escalate in ways no one anticipated. I've seen you walking through here multiple times, Pemberton said, his voice rising with each word. This is a private residential area. You don't live here and you have no business being here. Aaliyah shifted the manila folder to her other arm, a small movement that Pemberton interpreted as suspicious. Actually, sir, these are public sidewalks. But I understand your concern for neighborhood security. Could you tell me what authority you have to stop pedestrians? The question was asked politely, professionally, but it hit Pemberton like a challenge. In 6 years as HOA president, no one had questioned his right to patrol his own neighborhood. I'm the Homeowners Association president, he snapped. I have every right to question suspicious activity. Suspicious activity, Aaliyah repeated, pulling out her phone. Could you be specific about what I've done that appears suspicious? Mrs. Rodriguez had moved close enough to hear the exchange. The young woman's questions reminded her of interview techniques she'd learned decades ago. Calm, methodical, designed to gather information while revealing the other person's motivations. You've been casing houses, Pemberton declared, warming to his theory. Walking the same routes, taking notes, looking at security systems. I've got it all on camera. Aaliyah's eyebrows rose slightly. You've been filming me without my knowledge or consent? I've been documenting suspicious behavior in my neighborhood, Pemberton corrected, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure of the legal distinction. I see. Aaliyah made a note in her phone. And you've reported this to local authorities? I'm reporting it right now. Pemberton pulled out his own phone and dialed 911. Yes, I need police at the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street in Willowbrook Heights. There's a suspicious person who's been casing houses in our neighborhood for weeks. Young black female, approximately 18, carrying what appears to be surveillance materials. As he spoke to the dispatcher, Aaliyah quietly asked Mrs. Rodriguez, Ma'am, have you witnessed this entire interaction? Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. Every word, dear. Are you all right? I'm fine, thank you. Would you mind staying until the officers arrive? I may need a witness to verify what actually happened here. Something in Aaliyah's tone, professional, prepared, made Mrs. Rodriguez study her more carefully. The girl couldn't be more than 18, but she spoke like someone with experience in situations like this. There was something familiar about her composure, something that reminded Mrs. Rodriguez of colleagues from her government days. By now, several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the raised voices. Cell phones appeared, recording the confrontation from multiple angles. Pemberton seemed energized by the audience, his accusations becoming more elaborate. She's been photographing security systems, he announced to the growing crowd, taking notes about our schedules, our routines. This is clearly preparation for criminal activity. Mr. Pemberton, Aaliyah said calmly, you're making serious accusations. Do you have any evidence beyond your own observations? I have security footage, he declared confidently. May I ask what your security cameras actually show? The question caught Pemberton off guard. His cameras did show Aaliyah walking, but reviewing the actual footage would reveal nothing more suspicious than a young woman taking a leisurely stroll. Still, he'd committed to his story. They show you conducting surveillance of private property, he said. Officers David Patterson and Maria Hayes responded to the call within 4 minutes. Patterson, a 12-year veteran, had worked dozens of suspicious person calls in upscale neighborhoods. The pattern was always the same. Wealthy residents, usually white, reporting someone who didn't belong, usually a person of color. Hayes, newer to the force but already cynical about certain types of complaints, recognized Pemberton's name from previous reports. What seems to be the problem here? Patterson asked, though his body language suggested he'd already made certain assumptions about who was the complainant and who was the suspect. Pemberton launched into his explanation, his story growing more elaborate with each detail. The young woman had been surveilling houses for weeks. She'd been taking photographs of security systems with concealed equipment. She'd been asking neighbors questions about their schedules and security routines. She'd been making detailed notes about vulnerabilities in their home defense systems. None of these claims were true, but Pemberton delivered them with the confidence of a man who'd never been contradicted by police officers responding to his calls. "Is that accurate, miss?" Hayes asked Aaliyah, her tone suggesting she might be more skeptical than her partner. "No, officer, it's not." Aaliyah's response was calm, measured. "I've been walking through the neighborhood on 3 occasions over 2 weeks. I haven't taken any photographs, and I haven't spoken to any residents except for Mrs. Rodriguez here just now. I haven't asked anyone questions about their schedules or security systems." Patterson looked at Mrs. Rodriguez, who confirmed Aaliyah's account. "I've seen her walking by several times, always polite, never bothering anyone or looking at houses in any unusual way. This is the first time she's spoken to anyone, and that was only because Mr. Pemberton confronted her." "She's lying," Pemberton interjected. "I have security footage that proves she's been casing houses, taking pictures, making notes. This is clearly preparation for burglary or worse." "We'd be happy to review that footage," Hayes said. "Do you have it available now?" Pemberton hesitated. His security system did record the street, but reviewing the actual footage would show a young woman simply walking, nothing more. The recordings would contradict everything he'd just claimed. "It's on my home system. You'd need a warrant to access it," he said, hoping the legal barrier would prevent immediate review. Aaliyah spoke up quietly. "Officers, I'd like to request that you verify Mr. Pemberton's authority to detain pedestrians on public sidewalks." Patterson frowned. It was an unusual request from someone her age, phrased in language that suggested familiarity with police procedures and civil rights law. "Nobody's detained anyone," Patterson said. "We're just investigating a complaint." "I understand. But Mr. Pemberton has made specific accusations about criminal activity. I'd like to know what evidence he has beyond his own observations, and whether his observations actually constitute probable cause for police involvement." Hayes exchanged a glance with her partner. The girl was asking exactly the right questions, using exactly the right terminology. Most 18-year-olds, when confronted by police, became defensive, argumentative, or scared. This young woman was treating the situation like a legal proceeding. "What's your name, miss?" Hayes asked. "Aaliyah Chen Williams." She provided her identification without being asked, another small detail that suggested experience with police encounters. She also handed over her temporary resident card for the area, showing her legal right to be in the neighborhood. Patterson ran her ID through the system. Clean record, recent address change from Arlington to her current temporary residence with her great-aunt. Father listed as government employee, mother as federal contractor. Nothing suspicious, nothing that supported Pemberton's increasingly wild theories. The background check also revealed something interesting. Despite her young age, Aaliyah Chen Williams had a security clearance notation in the federal database. "Look," Pemberton said, frustration creeping into his voice as he sensed the officer's skepticism. "I know what I saw. She's been acting suspicious, taking notes, studying our houses. I want her removed from this neighborhood immediately." "On what legal basis?" Aaliyah asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Pemberton had no legal basis beyond his own suspicions and prejudices, but admitting that would undermine everything he'd claimed. "She doesn't belong here," he said finally, the words revealing more than he intended. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice sharp with decades of experience dealing with discrimination. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you mean by that?" Pemberton looked around, suddenly aware that his words were being recorded by multiple phones held by gathering neighbors. The crowd had grown to nearly 20 people, and their expressions ranged from curious to hostile, mostly hostile toward him. "I mean, she doesn't live in this neighborhood," he backpedaled. "Neither do the joggers who run through here every morning," Mrs. Rodriguez pointed out. "Neither do the dog walkers from adjacent neighborhoods. Neither do the delivery drivers, the postal workers, or the maintenance crews. Are you suggesting only residents can use public sidewalks? Aaliyah pulled out her phone and made a quiet call. Patterson caught enough of the conversation to realize this wasn't a typical family notification. Yes, this is Aaliyah Chen Williams. I need to report a potential operational security issue. Location, Willowbrook Heights, Virginia. Time, 15:47 hours. Status, contained but developing. Request immediate review of exposure protocols. Patterson frowned. Who are you calling, miss? My emergency contact, Aaliyah replied, which was technically accurate, though incomplete. The call lasted less than 30 seconds, but the person on the other end asked questions that required specific procedural answers. Hayes noticed that Aaliyah's responses sounded almost military in their precision, full of codes and protocols that civilians wouldn't typically know. Officers, Aaliyah said after ending her call, I want to be clear about something. This interaction will be reviewed at the federal level. Patterson stared at her. What did you say? I said this interaction will be reviewed by federal authorities. Why would federal authorities care about a neighborhood dispute? Aaliyah looked at him steadily. That will become clear soon enough. Before anyone could respond, Pemberton exploded. This is ridiculous. I demand you arrest her for trespassing and disturbing the peace. She's making threats about federal authorities to intimidate me. Patterson looked at his partner, then back at Aaliyah. Something wasn't adding up, but Pemberton was demanding action, and they had a complaint to resolve. The growing crowd was getting restless, and the situation needed resolution. Miss Chen Williams, Patterson said finally, I'm placing you under arrest for disturbing the peace. Aaliyah nodded calmly and placed her hands behind her back. I understand, officer. I'd like to request that you contact the federal duty officer at this number when we reach the station. She recited a phone number that Hayes quickly wrote down, though neither officer recognized the format. It didn't match any local, state, or standard federal contact numbers they knew. As the handcuffs clicked, Mrs. Rodriguez called out, Aaliyah, dear, what should I tell your family? Tell them the situation is contained, Aaliyah replied as she was led to the patrol car. And Mrs. Rodriguez, thank you for witnessing everything. Your testimony may be important. The Fairfax County Detention Center had processed thousands of arrests, but booking officer Janet Martinez had never encountered anyone quite like Aaliyah Chen Williams. While most 18-year-olds brought in on minor charges were either defiant, crying, or demanding to call their parents, Aaliyah maintained an almost eerie composure. First time arrested? Martinez asked, going through the standard intake questions. Yes, ma'am, Aaliyah replied, standing with perfect posture, hands clasped behind her back even though she was no longer cuffed. You seem awfully calm for someone facing charges. I understand the process, ma'am. I'm cooperating fully. Martinez paused her typing. Something about the girl's bearing reminded her of military personnel she'd processed over the years. That same disciplined stillness, the same respectful but distant professionalism. Military family? She asked. Government service, Aaliyah replied carefully. Meanwhile, at the Willowbrook Heights intersection, Officer Hayes was having second thoughts about the arrest. She'd reviewed Pemberton's written statement 3 times, and each reading made the accusations seem more absurd. According to his report, Aaliyah had been conducting surveillance operations and gathering intelligence for criminal purposes. The language was overwrought, almost paranoid. Patterson, she called to her partner. You need to see this guy's complaint history. Patterson joined her at the patrol car's computer terminal. Richard Pemberton's name appeared in 43 separate police reports over the past 18 months. The subjects of his complaints painted a clear pattern. Marcus Washington, loitering suspiciously while waiting for his rideshare. Maria Santos, disturbing the peace by speaking Spanish to her children at the playground. David Kim, trespassing while delivering food to a neighbor who'd ordered takeout. Jesus, Patterson muttered. How did we miss this pattern? Because we never looked, Hayes replied grimly. We just responded to calls. Back at the detention center, Aaliyah's phone call was connecting to a number that most people would never have access to. The voice that answered was crisp, professional, and immediately concerned. Duty desk. This is Agent Chen Williams, badge number 7749. I'm reporting a potential operational security breach. Status of compromise? Minimal but developing. Local law enforcement involvement. Request immediate legal consultation and security assessment. Understood. Location? Fairfax County Detention Center. Arrested approximately 16:30 hours on municipal charges. Cover status? Maintained but threatened. Subject Richard Pemberton may continue the investigation. We're dispatching legal counsel. Maintain operational security until arrival. The call lasted exactly 90 seconds. Officer Martinez, who'd been listening from across the room, approached Aaliyah with growing confusion. Miss, what exactly do you do for the government? I'm not at liberty to discuss that, ma'am. 20 minutes later, a woman in an expensive suit arrived at the detention center. She didn't look like the typical public defender or family attorney who usually showed up for 18-year-old arrestees. Attorney Sarah Kim, no relation to the suspect, carried herself with the confidence of someone who regularly dealt with federal agencies. I'm here to see Aaliyah Chen Williams, she announced at the front desk. Are you family counsel? The desk sergeant asked. I represent her employer. The sergeant frowned. Her employer? She's 18. What kind of employer sends lawyers for teenage employees? The kind that takes personnel security very seriously. In the consultation room, Attorney Kim reviewed the arrest report with growing amazement. They arrested you for walking on a public sidewalk? Essentially, yes. Mr. Pemberton's accusations were fabricated, but the officers felt compelled to resolve his complaint. Do you want to file a civil rights lawsuit? This is a textbook case of discriminatory enforcement. That's not my decision to make. My superiors will determine appropriate responses based on operational security considerations. Kim studied her young client. Aaliyah, how long have you been working for the agency? Official employment began 3 months ago. Training and assessment began 18 months ago. You're the youngest operative they've ever recruited, aren't you? I'm not at liberty to discuss operational details. Meanwhile, reporter Sarah Kim, who happened to share the attorney's surname, was investigating the arrest from her newsroom. A tip from a Willowbrook Heights resident had alerted her to the unusual circumstances. An 18-year-old black woman arrested for walking through an upscale neighborhood, with multiple witnesses claiming the charges were fabricated. But as Sarah dug deeper, she discovered inconsistencies that didn't fit the typical racial profiling narrative. The arrest report mentioned that the suspect had made references to federal review and provided non-standard emergency contact numbers. The booking officer had noted unusual composure and apparent familiarity with law enforcement procedures. Sarah made calls to her contacts in local law enforcement. None of them had ever encountered an 18-year-old who spoke like a trained professional or who had federal contacts on speed dial. There's something weird about this case, she told her editor. The girl they arrested isn't what she appears to be. Court proceedings were scheduled for the following week, but word of the unusual arrest was already spreading through legal and law enforcement circles. Judge Rebecca Thompson, who would preside over the case, received a call from the federal courthouse requesting coordination on a matter of mutual interest. What kind of mutual interest? Judge Thompson asked. The defendant may have federal connections that complicate local prosecution. What kind of federal connections? That will be clarified during proceedings, Your Honor. At the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, Pemberton was fielding calls from neighbors who'd witnessed the arrest. Several expressed concern about his accusations, but others supported his actions. The neighborhood was dividing along predictable lines. Mrs. Rodriguez, however, was making calls of her own. After 30 years in government service, she still had contacts in various agencies. Her conversation with a former colleague at the Central Intelligence Agency yielded surprising information. Elena, you need to be very careful about what you say regarding this incident, her contact warned. Why? What's so special about this girl? I can't discuss specifics, but let's just say her arrest has attracted attention at very high levels. How high? Deputy director level. Mrs. Rodriguez felt a chill of recognition. She'd suspected there was something familiar about Aaliyah's demeanor, but now she understood what she'd been seeing. The girl moved like an intelligence personnel because she was an intelligence personnel. As the week progressed, unusual observers began requesting access to the court proceedings. Federal attorneys filed appearances as interested parties. Media requests poured in from national outlets who'd heard rumors about the case's unusual circumstances. Judge Thompson had presided over thousands of municipal cases, but she'd never seen a disturbing peace charge generate federal interest, national media attention, and observer requests from intelligence agencies. The stage was set for a proceeding that would surprise everyone involved. The courtroom was packed beyond anything Judge Thompson had seen for a municipal case. Federal attorneys sat in the front row, their presence unexplained but undeniable. Media representatives filled the gallery, cameras ready despite restrictions on filming. Mrs. Rodriguez had secured a seat in the second row, her hands folded nervously as she waited for proceedings to begin. Richard Pemberton entered with confidence, nodding to supporters who'd come to witness his vindication. He'd spent the week refining his story, adding details that made Aaliyah's alleged surveillance activities sound increasingly sophisticated and threatening. When Aaliyah entered with her attorney, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. She wore a simple navy suit that somehow made her look both younger and older than her 18 years. Her composure was absolute, her bearing suggesting someone far more experienced than her age would indicate. All rise for the Honorable Judge Rebecca Thompson. Judge Thompson surveyed the packed courtroom with bewilderment. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a municipal hearing for disturbing the peace charges. I'm not sure why we have federal observers and national media present, but we'll proceed according to standard procedures. The prosecution presented a straightforward case. Officer Patterson testified about responding to a complaint from the Homeowners Association president. The arrest was routine, based on credible accusations of suspicious behavior and the defendant's failure to provide satisfactory explanation for her presence in the neighborhood. Pemberton took the stand with theatrical confidence. His testimony had evolved significantly since the initial police report. According to his new version, Aaliyah had been conducting sophisticated surveillance operations for weeks. She'd been photographing security systems with concealed equipment. She'd been timing patrol schedules and studying resident routines. She'd been preparing detailed maps of vulnerability points throughout the neighborhood. Your Honor, Pemberton declared, this was clearly preparation for serious criminal activity. I acted as any responsible citizen would to protect my community. He produced enlarged photographs from his security cameras, pointing to images of Aaliyah walking on public sidewalks. As you can see, she repeatedly returned to the same locations, always carrying materials for recording observations. The prosecution rested, confident in their straightforward case of neighborhood security and responsible citizenship. Defense attorney Kim approached the bench with unusual formality. Your Honor, my client would like to present evidence that will provide crucial context for these proceedings. What kind of evidence? Federal identification and employment documentation that explains her presence in the neighborhood. Judge Thompson frowned. Federal identification? What does that have to do with a local disturbing the peace charge? Everything, Your Honor. Aaliyah stood and addressed the court directly. Your Honor, I request permission to present my federal credentials to explain the nature of my activities in Willowbrook Heights. The courtroom fell silent. Pemberton looked confused. The federal observers leaned forward with interest. Proceed, Judge Thompson said. Aaliyah reached into her jacket and withdrew a small leather case. With deliberate care, she opened it to reveal a badge and identification card. The bailiff examined it first, his eyes widening in surprise before carrying it to Judge Thompson. Judge Thompson studied the credentials for a long moment, her expression shifting from confusion to astonishment. Ladies and gentlemen, The defendant has presented identification indicating she is a special agent with the Central Intelligence Agency. The courtroom erupted. Gasps echoed off the walls. Pemberton's face drained of color. Media representatives frantically scribbled notes despite the no-recording restrictions. "Order!" Judge Thompson called, banging her gavel repeatedly. "Order in the court!" When silence returned, Aaliyah spoke with quiet authority. "Your Honor, I am Special Agent Aaliyah Chen Williams, badge number 7749. At 18 years old, I am the youngest person ever recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency." Mrs. Rodriguez felt tears spring to her eyes. She'd known there was something special about this young woman, but the reality exceeded her suspicions. "My presence in Willowbrook Heights was not random," Aaliyah continued. "I was conducting a security assessment of the neighborhood as part of my training program. The manila folder Mr. Pemberton found so suspicious contained classified evaluations of potential vulnerability points in residential security systems." Judge Thompson stared at the credentials again. "Are you telling me this entire case involves the arrest of a CIA agent for doing her job?" "Essentially, yes, Your Honor." Pemberton finally found his voice. "That's impossible. She's just a teenager. This is some kind of elaborate hoax." From the gallery, a distinguished man in his 50s stood up. "Your Honor, I'm Deputy Director James Chen Williams. I'm also Aaliyah's father." Another wave of shocked murmurs swept the courtroom. The family connection explained Aaliyah's unusual poise and professional bearing. "My daughter was recruited through our Exceptional Talent Identification Program," Deputy Director Chen Williams continued. "Her unique combination of analytical skills, language abilities, and psychological profile made her an ideal candidate for specialized training. The security assessment she was conducting in Willowbrook Heights was part of her field evaluation requirements." Mrs. Rodriguez stood up suddenly. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Judge Thompson, overwhelmed by the unprecedented nature of the proceedings, nodded. "I'm Elena Rodriguez, retired CIA analyst. I recommended Aaliyah for the recruitment program 18 months ago after observing her exceptional abilities during a community volunteer project. Her arrest represents a serious compromise of operational security." The pieces were falling into place. Aaliyah's unusual composure, her knowledge of procedures, her federal contacts, everything made sense now. Pemberton was shaking his head frantically. "This can't be real. The CIA doesn't recruit teenagers. This is all fabricated to get her out of trouble." Defense Attorney Kim approached the bench with additional documentation. "Your Honor, these are Aaliyah's official personnel records, security clearance documentation, and training completion certificates. Everything has been verified through appropriate federal channels." Judge Thompson reviewed the documents with growing amazement. The paperwork was authentic, bearing official seals and signatures from the highest levels of the intelligence community. "Mr. Pemberton," Judge Thompson said slowly, "you didn't arrest a suspicious teenager. You had a CIA agent arrested for conducting official government business." The full impact of the situation was beginning to dawn on everyone present. Pemberton had not only made false accusations based on racial profiling, but he'd inadvertently compromised a federal intelligence operation. "Your Honor," Aaliyah said, "I want to emphasize that this revelation doesn't excuse inappropriate behavior, but it does provide context for my presence and activities in the neighborhood. My assessment was focused on general security vulnerabilities, not specific criminal planning." Deputy Director Chen Williams addressed the court again. "Your Honor, while we appreciate the local law enforcement response to citizen complaints, this incident has created significant operational security concerns that will require federal review." The magnitude of Pemberton's mistake was becoming clear to everyone except Pemberton himself, who continued to insist the entire revelation was an elaborate deception. But Mrs. Rodriguez knew better. She'd spent 30 years identifying talent for intelligence work, and she'd recognized something special in Aaliyah from their first interaction. The young woman's arrest hadn't just been a case of racial profiling, it had been the exposure of one of the CIA's most promising new recruits. Within hours of the courtroom revelation, Federal investigators descended on Willowbrook Heights like a quiet storm. Special Agent Maria Santos from the FBI's Civil Rights Division arrived first, followed by a team from the CIA's Security and Counterintelligence Center. What had begun as a simple municipal case had exploded into a federal investigation with multiple agencies involved. The investigation moved with methodical precision. Agent Santos began by interviewing every witness to Aaliyah's arrest, starting with Mrs. Rodriguez, whose 30-year intelligence background made her testimony particularly valuable. Mrs. Rodriguez, when did you first suspect Aaliyah might have government connections? From the moment I saw how she handled Mr. Pemberton's confrontation. She asked exactly the right questions, used precise legal terminology, and maintained operational security even under stress. In my experience, those skills don't develop accidentally. Did you recognize her before the arrest? Not personally, but I recognized the type. I've recommended dozens of candidates for intelligence work over the years. Aaliyah has that rare combination of intellectual ability and emotional control that makes exceptional operatives. The investigators then turned their attention to Richard Pemberton's complaint history. What they discovered painted a disturbing pattern of discriminatory enforcement that went far beyond Aaliyah's case. Detective Ray Johnson from the Fairfax County Police Department had been assigned to review all 43 complaints Pemberton had filed over 18 months. The pattern was undeniable. 37 involved people of color, and in nearly every case, Pemberton's accusations proved either exaggerated or completely false. "Look at this," Johnson told Agent Santos, spreading complaint reports across a conference table. "Marcus Washington arrested for loitering while waiting for his Uber. Maria Santos, no relation to you, reported for disturbing the peace because her kids were speaking Spanish at the playground. David Kim cited for trespassing while delivering food his neighbor had ordered. What happened to those cases? Most were dismissed after investigation, but not before the individuals went through arrest, booking, and legal expenses. The pattern suggests systematic harassment using law enforcement as a weapon." Meanwhile, the CIA's internal investigation focused on operational security. Deputy Director Chen Williams personally reviewed Aaliyah's training files with Security Chief Robert Martinez to assess the damage from her exposure. "How compromised is her operational capacity?" Chen Williams asked, though as her father, he already feared the answer. "Significantly. Her face has been photographed by the media, her identity is now public record, and her connection to the agency is documented in court proceedings. We'll need to completely restructure her career path." Recommendations? Transfer her to analytical divisions where deep cover isn't required. Her field operational career was essentially over before it began. The personal cost of Pemberton's accusations was becoming clear. Aaliyah had trained for 18 months for field operations that she would now never be able to perform. Her unique value as an undetectable young operative had been destroyed by racial profiling and false accusations. At the police department, Officers Patterson and Hayes faced their own reckoning. Internal Affairs investigator Captain Lisa Wong reviewed their body camera footage with uncomfortable attention to detail. "Officer Patterson, why didn't you verify Mr. Pemberton's accusations before making an arrest?" "He seemed credible, and we had a citizen complaint to resolve." "Did you review his complaint history?" "No, ma'am." "Did you ask to see the security footage he claimed to have?" "He said we'd need a warrant." "Did you attempt to verify the suspect's explanation for being in the neighborhood?" "She said she was visiting family in the area." "Did you check that?" Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "We ran her ID and saw she had a local address." Captain Wong paused the body camera footage at the moment Aaliyah mentioned federal review. "What did you think when she said the interaction would be reviewed at the federal level?" "I thought she was trying to intimidate us." "Did it occur to you that she might actually have federal connections?" "She's 18 years old, it seemed impossible." Hayes spoke up. "Captain, in our defense, nothing in our training prepared us for encountering a teenage CIA agent." "That's exactly the problem," Captain Wong replied. You made assumptions based on age and race instead of following proper investigative procedures. The community reaction in Willowbrook Heights was swift and divided. Residents who had supported Pemberton's actions found themselves on the wrong side of a federal investigation. Those who had questioned his motivations felt vindicated but demanded systemic changes. A packed community meeting at the neighborhood center became a forum for confronting uncomfortable truths. Mrs. Rodriguez, now revealed as a former CIA analyst, commanded respect as she addressed her neighbors. For 30 years, I worked to identify and develop talent for our nation's intelligence services. Aaliyah Chen Williams represents exactly the kind of exceptional individual our agencies need to protect America's interests. Richard Pemberton's actions didn't just harm an innocent young woman. They compromised national security operations. Pemberton, facing multiple federal investigations, attempted to defend his actions. I was protecting our community. How was I supposed to know she was CIA? She looked suspicious. Suspicious how? Mrs. Rodriguez asked pointedly. Suspicious because she was black? Suspicious because she was young? Suspicious because she had the audacity to walk through your neighborhood? The room fell silent. Several residents who had initially supported Pemberton began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah Kim, the reporter who had been investigating the story, presented her findings to the community meeting. Her research revealed the true scope of discriminatory enforcement in Willowbrook Heights. Over the past 18 months, police have responded to 43 complaints from Richard Pemberton. 37 involved people of color. 0 resulted in actual criminal charges that held up under investigation. The pattern indicates systematic abuse of law enforcement resources to harass minority residents and visitors. The financial implications were staggering. Each false complaint had cost the police department resources, the court system time, and the targeted individuals money and emotional trauma. The federal investigation would cost significantly more. Attorney Sarah Kim, no relation to the reporter, began documenting civil rights violations for potential litigation. We're looking at a clear pattern of discriminatory enforcement that violates federal civil rights laws. Every person falsely accused based on Mr. Pemberton's complaints has grounds for legal action. The investigation expanded to examine the Homeowners Association's own practices. Financial audits revealed that Pemberton had been using HOA funds for surveillance equipment and private security consultations, expenses never approved by the board or disclosed to residents. Board member Jennifer Walsh called for Pemberton's immediate removal. Richard has exceeded his authority, compromised our community's reputation, and potentially exposed us to massive legal liability. His actions don't represent Willowbrook Heights' values. But perhaps the most damaging revelation came from Aaliyah's security assessment itself. Her classified report, now declassified for investigative purposes, identified genuine security vulnerabilities in the neighborhood that Pemberton's amateur surveillance had completely missed. Ironically, Agent Santos noted, if Mr. Pemberton had simply allowed Agent Chen Williams to complete her assessment, the neighborhood would have received valuable security recommendations. Instead, his interference eliminated those benefits while creating far greater problems. The federal investigation also revealed coordination failures between local and federal law enforcement. The communication protocols that should have identified Aaliyah's status had failed, leading to her arrest despite her legitimate federal identification. CIA Security Chief Martinez recommended systematic changes. We need better coordination protocols with local law enforcement to prevent future incidents. Our operatives shouldn't be arrested for doing their jobs because of inadequate communication systems. Deputy Director Chen Williams, balancing his roles as agency official and concerned father, pushed for the broadest possible reforms. This incident exposed failures at multiple levels: community, local law enforcement, and federal coordination. We need comprehensive changes to prevent recurrence. As the investigation progressed, the true cost of Pemberton's actions became clear. An exceptionally talented young operative's career had been compromised. Federal operations had been exposed. Community trust had been shattered. and the very security concerns that had motivated Aaliyah's assessment remained unaddressed. The stage was set for consequences that would reach far beyond a simple municipal courtroom. 3 weeks after the courtroom revelation, the consequences cascaded through every level of the system that had failed Aaliyah Chen Williams. Federal prosecutors filed civil rights charges against Richard Pemberton under Section 1983, alleging conspiracy to deprive citizens of their constitutional rights through abuse of law enforcement processes. The charges were unprecedented in their scope. Pemberton faced federal prosecution not just for Aaliyah's false arrest, but for a pattern of discriminatory complaints that had systematically targeted people of color over 18 months. Each false report constituted a separate civil rights violation, with potential penalties reaching into decades of federal prison time. At an emergency homeowners association meeting, the board voted unanimously to remove Pemberton from all positions. Board President Jennifer Walsh read the resolution with barely contained anger. Richard Pemberton's actions have exposed our community to massive legal liability, damaged our reputation, and violated the basic principles of equal treatment that define American values. His removal is immediate and permanent. The financial audit revealed even more damaging information. Pemberton had diverted nearly $40,000 in HOA funds for unauthorized surveillance equipment, private security consultations, and legal fees for his previous discriminatory complaints. The board voted to pursue full restitution and referred the matter to prosecutors for potential embezzlement charges. The Fairfax County Police Department faced its own reckoning. Chief Patricia Morrison announced sweeping reforms during a press conference that drew national attention. Officers Patterson and Hayes received formal reprimands and were required to complete additional training on civil rights, de-escalation techniques, and proper investigative procedures. This incident revealed critical failures in our response protocols, Chief Morrison acknowledged. We failed to properly investigate citizen complaints, failed to recognize patterns of discriminatory reporting, and failed to follow basic verification procedures. These failures compromised an active federal intelligence operation and violated the civil rights of multiple community members. The department implemented new verification requirements for citizen complaints, mandatory bias training for all officers, and coordination protocols with federal agencies to prevent future incidents involving undercover operatives. Judge Thompson, in dismissing all charges against Aaliyah, delivered remarks that would be quoted in civil rights training programs for years to come. This case represents a catastrophic failure of assumptions over evidence, prejudice over procedure, and discrimination over justice. The defendant was not only innocent of all charges, she was actively serving her country while being falsely accused of threatening it. The courtroom was packed again for Pemberton's federal arraignment. This time, Aaliyah sat in the gallery next to her father and Mrs. Rodriguez, watching as the man who had triggered her arrest faced serious federal charges. When asked for his plea, Pemberton's voice cracked as he whispered, "Not guilty." His attorney attempted to argue that his client had acted in good faith, believing he was protecting his community. Federal prosecutor David Martinez responded with devastating precision. Good faith doesn't explain 37 complaints against people of color and only 6 against white residents. Good faith doesn't explain surveillance equipment purchased with stolen community funds. Good faith doesn't explain the systematic abuse of law enforcement resources to harass innocent citizens. The most powerful moment came when Aaliyah addressed the community during a reconciliation meeting organized by Mrs. Rodriguez. Standing before the same neighbors who had witnessed her arrest, she spoke with the composed authority that had first caught Mrs. Rodriguez's attention. "I don't want anyone to think this incident defines Willowbrook Heights or reflects the character of this community. One person's prejudice and poor judgment created this situation, but the response from neighbors like Mrs. Rodriguez, residents who questioned false accusations, and officials who demanded accountability shows the true character of this community." Her words brought several residents to tears, including some who had initially supported Pemberton's actions. "I entered this neighborhood to conduct a security assessment designed to protect residents from genuine threats. Instead, I encountered the kind of discrimination that creates division and weakness in our communities. But I also witnessed the kind of courage and integrity that makes our communities strong. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke next, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in intelligence work. Aaliyah represents the best of America's next generation, brilliant, dedicated, selfless in her service to our country. Richard Pemberton's actions didn't just harm her personally. They compromised national security operations and exposed our community to justified federal scrutiny. The community voted to establish a permanent oversight committee, chaired by Mrs. Rodriguez, to review any future complaints involving potential discrimination. They also voted to implement the security recommendations from Aaliyah's assessment, finally addressing the genuine vulnerabilities that had motivated her original mission. Reporter Sarah Kim's investigation won a regional journalism award for exposing systematic discrimination in law enforcement responses. Her comprehensive reporting revealed similar patterns in 3 other upscale communities, leading to federal investigations across the region. The legal settlements were substantial. Pemberton faced personal liability exceeding $200,000 for the individuals he had falsely accused. The HOA's insurance covered additional settlements, but residents faced special assessments to cover legal costs and implement required reforms. Most significantly, Aaliyah's case became a catalyst for national policy changes. The CIA implemented new coordination protocols with local law enforcement to protect operative security. Police departments nationwide received training materials based on the Willowbrook Heights incident. Civil rights organizations used the case as a model for prosecuting systematic discrimination through abuse of police complaint processes. Deputy Director Chen Williams, speaking at a law enforcement conference, summarized the broader implications. This incident demonstrates how personal prejudice can compromise national security operations while violating fundamental civil rights. The solutions require systemic changes, not just individual accountability. The consequences extended far beyond individual punishment. They created lasting institutional changes designed to prevent similar failures in the future, transforming a moment of injustice into a catalyst for meaningful reform. 6 months later, Aaliyah Chen Williams walked through the corridors of CIA headquarters at Langley, Virginia, wearing the crisp business attire of a new intelligence analyst. The field operations career she had trained for was over, but her analytical work on transnational security threats had already earned recognition from senior leadership. Her case had become a watershed moment in civil rights enforcement and intelligence operations security. The Willowbrook Protocol, named after the neighborhood where her arrest occurred, now required coordination between federal agencies and local law enforcement to prevent the compromise of undercover operations through discriminatory policing. Mrs. Rodriguez had embraced her role as chair of the Willowbrook Heights Community Oversight Committee. Under her leadership, the neighborhood had become a model for inclusive community governance. Property values had actually increased as the area's reputation for fairness and security attracted diverse, successful residents. People want to live in communities where they're judged by their character, not their appearance, Mrs. Rodriguez explained to a delegation visiting from other HOAs seeking to implement similar reforms. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically destructive. Richard Pemberton had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and 3 years of supervised probation. His conviction on civil rights charges made him ineligible for any future positions involving community governance or security. The financial penalties had forced him to sell his Willowbrook Heights home and relocate to a different state. But perhaps more importantly, his case had become a teaching tool. Federal prosecutors used his conviction to demonstrate that systematic discrimination through abuse of law enforcement processes would face serious consequences. Civil rights organizations pointed to his case as proof that the justice system could work when properly applied. Officers Patterson and Hayes had completed their additional training and returned to active duty with a deeper understanding of their responsibilities. Patterson later testified before a congressional committee about the importance of bias training and proper investigative procedures. "I learned that assumptions can be more dangerous than actual threats," he told lawmakers. Our job is to investigate facts, not confirm prejudices. The police department's reforms had produced measurable results. Discriminatory complaint patterns had virtually disappeared, and community trust in law enforcement had actually increased despite the initial controversy. Chief Morrison's comprehensive reforms had become a model for departments nationwide. Reporter Sarah Kim's investigation had expanded into a book about systematic discrimination in affluent communities. Her work documented similar patterns across the country and the legal strategies being used to address them. The book's profits funded a scholarship program for journalism students from underrepresented communities. Aaliyah's security assessment had finally been implemented, making Willowbrook Heights genuinely safer while serving as a template for residential security improvements in similar communities. The irony wasn't lost on residents that the person Pemberton had accused of threatening their security had actually enhanced it. During a ceremony honoring community leaders, Aaliyah returned to Willowbrook Heights for the first time since her arrest. Standing at the same intersection where Pemberton had confronted her, she reflected on how a moment of injustice had catalyzed meaningful change. 6 months ago, I was arrested on this corner for the crime of walking while black in an upscale neighborhood, she told the gathered crowd. Today, this community stands as an example of how we can confront our failures and build something better. Mrs. Rodriguez, now recognized as a community hero, introduced Aaliyah with obvious pride. This young woman represents everything I hope to achieve in 30 years of government service: brilliant analysis, unshakable integrity, and the courage to serve despite personal cost. The reforms triggered by Aaliyah's case had spread far beyond Willowbrook Heights. Similar communities across the country were implementing oversight committees, bias training, and coordination protocols. Federal agencies had revised their procedures to better protect operative security while maintaining community relationships. But the most important change was less tangible but more profound. The case had sparked national conversations about assumptions, accountability, and the cost of prejudice. It had demonstrated that justice systems could self-correct when citizens demanded better and officials took responsibility for failures. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's assumptions about another person were completely wrong? Have you seen how quickly prejudice can escalate into injustice? More importantly, have you seen how communities can choose to learn from their mistakes and build something better? Aaliyah's story reminds us that heroes come in unexpected forms, that justice sometimes requires federal intervention, and that real change happens when ordinary people choose to do better. What assumptions might you be making about the people around you? What would happen if you chose curiosity over judgment, investigation over assumption? Share this story if it makes you think differently about the people you encounter every day. Like this video if you believe in the power of justice systems to self-correct. Subscribe to Black Voices Speak for more stories about how ordinary moments can become catalysts for extraordinary change. And remember, the next time you see someone who looks like they don't belong in your space, consider that they might belong there more than you know.